Okay, good. I'm going to give a 1 minute introduction of who I am. My name's Bob, and 34 years old. I study philosophy, but at the moment it's informal. I haven't yet been accepted into any program where I could eventually get a job as a philosopher. And I've been a theist since 2001, and I'm going to argue that dualism points to theism. I guess that's the end of my introduction. Now you can go, Chris.
Great, thanks, Bob. So my name is Christopher Ray. I studied philosophy at Bates College. I'm currently a law school student, and I write the Teapot Atheist blog, which you can access at teapotatheism.blogspot.com, now available on fine web browsers everywhere for free. And in today's debate, I will be defending the position that physicalism is the best model of the facts about the mind as they are currently available to us. So, Bob, if you would like to go ahead and just summarize your position real quick.
Okay. Do you see? Oh, I guess. Do you see on your Skype that it says 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll end my summary at about 10 minutes. Christopher and I are not engaged in a purely academic dispute that the man on the street does not care about. What the mind is made of and whether or not it exists really matters. I will be arguing that the mind is made of an immaterial substance which, like the other four fundamental forces, can control the movement of matter. I even want to state how strong I think this force is. Given one atom, the strong force is 38 orders of magnitude stronger than gravity. The electromagnetic is 35 orders of magnitude stronger. The weak force is 25 orders of magnitude stronger than gravity. The mind force is somewhere between 5 and 15 orders of magnitude stronger than gravity. Of course, the strength of gravity increases as the object becomes more massive, so there is a point perhaps when an object contains more than 100 atoms that the mind force can no longer act on it because it is too massive. It is not enough to show that physicalism is merely incomprehensible or implausible. Dualism is also not very comprehensible. One has to show that it is impossible. Although we haven't agreed on a strict definition of physicalism yet, I typically define physicalism as anything that one can touch, or if it's a force, then that force behaves a mathematical, predictable law. The standard account of how order arises in our universe from an atheist physicalist perspective is to simply say it just happens. If you read closely any physicalist account of how order arises, you will find at the end of the day that it boils down to nothing more than in a closed system, order cannot arise, but in an open system, it can arise. That is not an acceptable account for how order arises. If you really think hard, order from a physicalist perspective cannot in principle arise. The physicalist must believe that all movement is due to either law or chance. The physicalist can offer no consistent account for design in our universe. If all motion, and when I say design, we can debate about whether or not animals are designed, but I think everyone will agree that Apple computers and cars are designed. If all motion is due to law or chance, then planning is impossible. Law has the structure, all A or B, such as all force is mass times acceleration, or all energy is mass times the speed of light squared. In other words, law treats identical units identically. If units are treated identically, then one cannot plan, since planning requires that you treat identical units differently. If you want to build a staircase, for example, out of identical bricks, law cannot build it. Neither by adding chance as an explanation for motion can one obtain planning. Chance, by definition, cannot plan. Chance means one event has no bearing on the other. If that is the definition of chance, then whatever that is, that thing cannot plan. A combination of chance and law therefore cannot plan, since planning requires foresight of the following event. Dualism provides a solution to the problem of order and planning. Dualism asserts that there is a force which can choose to move a limited number of particles when and where at once. We can now prove dualism by reducing the contrary position to the absurd. Let's for the moment simply assume that physicalism is the position which asserts that dualism is not true. Either there is a force that can move particles where at once, or there is not. Let's now assume the physicalist position and see if it leads to an obvious contradiction with the facts on the ground. We can do this in a four-step logical procedure. Step 1. If the mind force does not exist, then there is not a force which can move particles where at once. That statement is simply true by definition. Step 2. If there is not a force which moves particles where at once, then order cannot consistently arise. The key word here is consistently. Chance can produce order on extremely rare occasions. Step 3. Order consistently arises. Step 4. Therefore, there is a force which can move particles where at once. This is our basis for believing in dualism. Let me here point out that we humans accept the existence of things that we cannot understand all the time. Give me about 1 more minute, okay?
Sure thing.
We do not understand dark energy or dark matter, yet we believe they exist. We do not understand how massless particles such as photons interact with mass, but we believe it happens. We do not understand how the 4 fundamental forces causes matter to move at a mathematical rate, yet we believe it exists. Finally, it is not enough to simply prove dualism. One must show why it matters. If dualism is true, then it is much more likely that God exists than not. God is simply a force that can move particles where he wants. If we humans can move particles where we want, then it does not require a huge leap in logic to conclude that God can also move particles where he wants. Thanks. Okay, Chris, you have...
All right. Thanks, Bob. So I'll just throw in my 5 minutes here. So the position that I'm going to articulate and defend tonight is primarily a position of physicalism about minds. I will primarily be construing the mind as a physical process, as a process of the brain, such that the mind is essentially supervenient on the brain along the normal parameters of supervenience as they've been discussed in philosophy going back several years. I think probably the best footnote for here will be footnote number 19 in my written commentary. Sort of the main body of argument that I'll be advancing against dualism, rather than merely for the truth of physicalism, is not so much a strict refutation of dualism as simply saying that it is unnecessary, that dualism results in a causal over-determination of physical events, and that on that it's simply not a necessary component of explaining mental phenomena. But if the Q&A so requires, and I foresee it so doing, a broader discussion about physicalism, about the world, instead of about just the human mind, about animal minds, about components of the universe that appear to be designed, then I would broaden my definition of physicalism to be something along the order of an exclusion of the supernatural, to say that basically following the causal closure argument as was advanced by sorry, what was the name? This is going to be footnote number 1 on my written commentary, David Papineau's causal closure argument, saying that simply no such entities to explain mental activity are necessary. Mainly I'll be looking at lines of evidence about the relationship between mental events and physical events, about the massive body of evidence that exists going back to the days of Galen and earlier, about the relationship between the brain and physical events. I will probably be asking Bob to clarify in great detail what he means by a mind force, and more specifically what he means by that mind force interacting with particles in the brain. One of the primary objections that's been raised against Descartes' formulation of dualism, which has been sort of the mainstream paradigm in non-physicalist philosophy, shall we say, for quite a while. One of the main objections that's been raised against him is that there is no good account of the exact nature of the relationship between the interaction between the mind substance, the dualized substance in the physical world. As Bob stated in his introduction, he believes that the mind is a separate substance from the brain. And I think that this doctrine raises some of the very serious objections that have been raised against Descartes over the centuries. So I will certainly be curious to hear about the relation